Hello guys, what's up? Today I'm going to be showing you 10 ways to MLG in Minecraft. Not including the water bucket, I have 10 other items you can use in order to MLG. Okay, so the first item you can use other than a water bucket is the Enderperal. Okay, so why use the Enderpearl? Well, the Enderpearl is really nice to use because it is super duper easy, but the only problem is that whenever you teleport, it does cause a little bit of damage. So if you're at like half a heart, then you don't want to use an Enderpearl, but you can like start MLGing like at the very start of a cliff, like after you fall. Instead of like with a water bucket, you have to time it perfectly in order to be safe, but with an Enderpearl, you just gotta look straight down and then right click, and then no matter how high you are, you will be safe. Next up, the Cobweb. The Cobweb can be used anywhere, including the nether dimension, unlike a water bucket, which can only be used in the end or the overworld. The problem with the Cobweb, though, is that it's sticky, and when you land on top of it, you go really slow, so it's kind of hard to escape it once you're in it, but it does not do damage. So the Enderpearl, whenever you use it, it does do some damage, but the Cobweb does not. So if you're like on half a heart, the Cobweb will actually save you, but the Enderpearl will not. So that's why the Cobweb is sometimes better than the Enderpearl. But the stickiness of the Cobweb is like a double-edged sword. Even though it makes you go really slow when you're in contact with it, that's a pretty good thing, because if you actually use it on the side of a cliff or something, then you can actually make yourself your own little platform right under you, and then once you fall through the Cobweb, you'll land on your platform. So that's something very unique about the Cobweb. Okay, so now it's time for the bed. So the bed is very interesting because it can only be used at night, and it has to be used in the overworld, unless you want to be exploded in the nether or the end. So the bed isn't that useful, and it's also very hard to use, but I mean, like, it's another way to MLG, and it's another option. But if you do only place it on the ground and you don't right click into it in order to sleep, it still reduces your damage, kind of like the Haybale, but at the same time, if you want to use its full potential, it has to be nighttime and you have to be in the overworld. Okay, so the boat is pretty interesting because you can actually right click into it, meaning that if you fall off the side of a cliff and you're too far away to block clutch on the side of the wall, then you can just use a boat to place it and then right click into it, which will actually move you to it, which is actually pretty cool because in order to do a block clutch, you have to be close to the wall, but if you're not close to the wall, then you can just use a boat and right click into the boat and it'll still work exactly the same way, which is actually pretty cool. Now it's time for the hay bales. So the hay bales are pretty cool because they are very easily obtained. You can find them easily in villages, but the only problem is that they only reduce your damage instead of completely canceling the fall damage. So if you fall from really high heights or if you have low health, you will still die, but they're still very useful. So now it's time for the slime blocks. So slime blocks are very cool because they are very similar to hay bales, but the cool thing about them is that they don't cause you any damage, and if you build a lot of redstone machines, you usually use slime blocks. So whenever you're making like a flying machine or something and you fall off your flying machine, then you can use slime blocks to MLG, which is actually really cool. The only problem though is that they're hard to get because you need 9 slime blocks, and that's usually mid to end game. So now it's time for the ladder. Okay, so the ladder is pretty cool because it is the easiest item to obtain out of all the other items because all you need is 7 sticks. 7 sticks. It's really easy to get and it can be pretty useful in speedruns. The only problem though is that it is hard to use and you can only place it on the side of a block. So now it's time for rideable animals. So for rideable animals, at least for horses, you don't even need an item. You actually need an empty item slot in order for this to work. But the only problem is that it's a rare setup. I mean, I have never ever fallen off a cliff or off a bridge, and then right under me I have a horse. I mean, like, that just never happens. But at the same time, it does not require any items, so that's one of the cool things about it. But if you want to use a strider, you actually do need a saddle. But I mean, like, do you want to fall into lava or do you want to fall into a strider? Now for the vines that are twisty. So the cool thing about the twisting vines is that they're actually very similar to the cobwebs, except they don't have the stickiness. The only problem with them though is that you cannot place them on the side of a block. So if you're falling off a cliff and you're close to the cliff, you actually can't save yourself, but with a cobweb you actually can. But nonetheless, twisting vines are very useful. Before I go on with the video, consider pressing that red subscribe button. It's free and it really helps out the channel. And now for the one that, in my opinion, is the one that has failed the most, scaffolding. So the reason why I say it's the one that's failed the most is because whenever I use it, I always place it down at the wrong time and I always fall on top of it and die. when you're really supposed to place it down when you're basically gonna be in the middle of the block. So it's really hard to use, but it can be used in all dimensions, just like most of these. But scaffolding anyways is usually used from high heights, so you're usually going to have this in your inventory whenever you fall from a high height. Now it's time for the gallery of categories. So here are the easiest ways to MLG in my opinion. First being the Enderperal and the last being the Haybale. All of these are really easy, except for the slime block and Haybales. Those are a tiny bit harder. But other than that, these are all easy, in my opinion. You can use all of these items to MLG in all dimensions, except in the end you actually have to bring the horse or strider into the end, because they don't naturally spawn there, but it's still possible if you do bring the animals. I also made a speedrunning category from most available to least available, so you'll most likely have access to all of these items, especially the ladder and the bow, and of course, the water bucket. Because the ladder and the boat is just wood and you always need wood, and then also it's very likely to get hay bales from villages, and then also twisting vines from the nether. And then I've got my most used to least used category, and by the way, this is my opinion and observation, so of course the water bucket is mostly used. It's the one that everyone uses. I mean, it's the most simple one. Then in my opinion, the cobweb is used a lot, as well as the bow and the twisting vines, and then beds are used a bit, and then also scaffolding is used a bit, but it's usually failed, at least from my observation. Enderpearls are also used a bit for MLGs, and as well as hay bales. And then in my opinion, the ladder is not used that much because it is extremely hard to use, and then riding mobs is almost never used because I mean, like, that's in very rare occasions. And then in my opinion and observation, slime blocks are basically completely ignored. They are one of the easiest ways to MLG, yet they're barely used. And the last category, but not the least, the most useful to least useful items. And by the way, this is my opinion, and it also does not account for difficulty. So the most useful in my opinion is the Enderperal, because I mean, like, it is crazy insane. You can just use it for any type of MLG. It's just the best. But you just gotta remember that it does have that one drawback with the teleportation damage. I think boats are extremely useful because you can use it to side MLG, like you place it on the side of a cliff and then right click into it. Unlike other blocks, you can't right click into them, you can only do that with the boat, so that's why it's a little bit ahead of all these other blocks. And then the slime block all the way to the twisting vine are all very useful, but also remember that I'm not accounting for difficulty, and scaffolding is very hard to use, but it is still very useful if you have managed to master the craft of scaffolding. And then in my opinion, which may seem surprising, is that water buckets are only useful. Reason why is that they can only be used in the end and the overworld. They cannot be used in the nether. And even though hay bales can be used in all dimensions, unlike the water bucket, they only reduce your damage, so that's why I only put them in the useful category, because they won't save you from a really high height. Ladders are also useful, but they can only be placed on the side of a block. And then the last two. The bed, which I think is not useful, because the reason why is you can only use them at night in the overworld, and of course, like I said, they do reduce your damage, but I mean, if you want to use the full potential of the bed, you're most likely not gonna ever use it, because first off, you need a bed in your inventory, and then second off, you have to be in the overworld at nighttime. So I mean, like, you're most likely never gonna use a bed to MLG, but it's still possible. And then the almost completely useless MLG, which is riding an animal, because it's just so rare for a horse or strider to be right under you when you fall. And there you have it. Those are the 10 other ways you can MLG in Minecraft. And that's the end of the video. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, please leave it a like, and while you're down there, leave a comment on which way to MLG surprised you the most. If you haven't already, consider pressing that subscribe button. Before I go, I just want to say that you matter. See ya later.